to be, in a position to host Inspiration and Adaptation, a weekly dialogue exploring artists' innovations and adaptations. Bunnell Street Art Center is situated within the tribal lands of Nichiltana, Ninilchik Village Tribe, whose descendants trace their roots from the ancient Ketchimak peoples, the Dena'ina, and Sugpiaq peoples of this region. These people have sustained these lands since time immemorial. And Bunnell is committed to resisting colonialism by partnering with Indigenous artists and supporting Indigenous-led practices. This week, Shared Universe Book Club reimagines the Arctic and alternative histories of Alaska. Nathan Schaefer is joining me with many guests and participants in this project. We'll discuss Dirigibles of Denali, an augmented reality app and interactive print project that reimagines 3 domed cities that were planned but never built in Alaska: Seward Success, Denali City, and Arctic Town. I'm so pleased that several of the participants in this project are with me here today. And starting with Nathan, just going to ask you all to introduce yourselves, and then we'll move into some questions and some images. Thank you so much and welcome. Nathan.
Thank you, Asia. It's really cool to see everybody's faces. So my name is Nathan Schaefer. I am a new media artist from Alaska, and my focus has been augmented reality for the last couple of years as I'm switching more into digital humanities. This project was Dirigibles of Denali, was in 2018, and we got a lot of really cool writers from Alaska together to all write short fiction pieces set in these cities in Alaska that never was. And I've always wanted to get with all these people together because it was all so disparate. Like everybody was working individual, and even though we had a nice little Facebook group where we could communicate, we never had this. And I'm just unbelievably excited to hear everybody talk about it right now. So I'm gonna stop.
Well, thank you, Nathan. It's delightful to have you. And I see many other participants in the project here. I'm just going to move over to Lucas Raleigh and ask you, Lucas, to share with us a self-introduction and your role in the project. You're muted, Lucas. Thanks.
Yay, unmuted.
Awesome.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm Lucas Raleigh. I'm actually originally from Homer, so I like to go down there and visit a lot. But I started off as an artist, and then I did playwriting. I worked with Richard and Josh in the theater world, and I've always been a science fiction writer. So Nathan contacted me about this project, and I just wrote a little science fiction story about my favorite caribou hunting spot up on the Denali Highway, and inserted it into this world of the tent city and the dirigibles and everything. It was just a lot of fun. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Richard, it's great to have you back, Richard Perry. Tell us a little bit about your role with this project.
Sure. So just to feedback off of what Lucas says, I really am into science fiction as well. And in fact, when we first met at where we worked at Cook Inlet Tribal Council a decade or so ago, he recognized the chirp on my phone as a Star Trek sound. So fellow nerd alert. So I'm like Richard Perry from Anchorage, Alaska, and I moved here as an adult when I was 34, and really was interested in kind of rediscovering my connection to my Alaska Native heritage. And part of that process, I also joined Lucas in the playwright workshop that he was in. And my love of writing really took off, and the sense of collaboration and kind of a shared environment and creativity was just something that I still enjoy to do now, and it's something that is central to the work that I do. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Richard. Terrific. Thanks so much for joining us. Jacqueline Bergamino, welcome. Lovely to see you today.
Thank you, Asia. Yeah, I'm Jacqueline. I have an MFA in creative writing from the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and I used to teach creative writing there.
Terrific. And you're a contributing writer in this project.
Yes, I am. This was my first speculative fiction. It was really
Fantastic.
fun.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's move over to Joshua Medster. Welcome, Joshua. And you might need to unmute there. I am not hearing you. Is anybody else hearing Joshua?
No.
Nope.
Okay.
Oh no.
Joshua, I'm going to recommend that you just restart and try rejoining us, and then I'm going to just scooch on over to Melissa Shaganoff and welcome Melissa. It's always fantastic
Wait,
to have you with us. Oh,
can you guys
there
hear me
are.
now?
Yes, welcome. Great
Okay,
to hear
yeah, I
you.
had my Bluetooth headphones on.
Okay.
Sorry, I usually use. I just got done with a day of teaching. I'm kind of spaced out right now. I usually use Zoom and not super familiar with. Oh wait, this is Zoom.
Yeah.
WebEx. I usually use WebEx. Hey,
Good to
good to
have
see
you.
everybody. So what was the question? How did I get involved with
Yeah,
dirigibles?
if you could give us a self-introduction and how you became involved with the project. Thank you.
So I got involved with this project through Nathan. He called me up and wanted to know if I wanted to be involved with this. I've known Nathan for a long time. We went to UAA together in the mid-late 90s. And I'm not super adept at fiction writing, actually. I'm a poet, but anything that Nathan tells me to do, I do it. And I've been trying my hand at speculative fiction and poetry, and generally just trying to get into futurism and transhumanism. It's, very curious to me. So this was something I wanted to take a look at, and yeah. Nathan and a friend of his, Adimola, and I, and Joelle, his wife, Nathan's wife, we did a little bit of Denali Dome stuff in Philadelphia a couple years ago, and that's kind of how I got started with this. So I wrote a couple of stories that are in the Dirigibles anthology, and yeah, that's kind of how I got started. Couple of BMX type of things. So.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, Joshua. Also in this anthology is Vivian Faith Prescott, who's just joining us. And I see you're still muted, Vivian, but I just wanted to invite you to the circle to welcome you and to ask if you might just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you became involved in the Dirigibles of Denali project as a writer. Thank you.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. It took a while to figure out the technology, even though I supposedly know the technology to get in. But I was invited by Nathan to contribute to this project. And at first I thought, wow, this is so complex. I mean, he wanted me to write for a story, and I thought, I had heard of the dome cities and stuff like that before, because I was born in the 60s. So I did hear a little bit about it, but I thought this was really fascinating, even though I wasn't sure what augmented reality was and all those things he was talking about, and so excited. But I think it was his excitement that drew me to the project. So I was working on some stories kind of based on Sami girl and Sami woman. And I thought maybe I could write specifically to that piece or what he was working on the project. So, and as I developed, my mind was just blown about the technology and all the stories and the many layers of this project. So
Fantastic. So happy to have you with us today.
And I write poetry, nonfiction, and fiction, so it wasn't too much to come up with this whole world and reality, because I have written in this genre before.
Fascinating. Wonderful. Well, thank you. And there are several other writers in the project who may be joining us, including Leslie Kamiko Ward, Skywalker Payne, Patrick Lichty is with us as well. Patrick, would you provide a self-introduction?
Okay, and I'll try to keep it short. Is that Nathan and I have been working together on this project for a long time. We were actually part of this, I think the first contemporary art AR group called Manifest AR, and where I found out about his Exit Glacier Terminus project, which I actually came up and saw. And the thing is that while I'm not Alaska, I'm originally from Ohio, and am now in Minnesota, just got back from Abu Dhabi. The thing is that a lot of my heritage is Alaskan, is that I had an uncle who worked on the Alaska Railroad, and my father served in World War II at NAVSA, ADAC, which while he was dying, I went out and I did a documentary on it, which never been produced because it was really primarily for my father. But in going out and seeing the Exit Glacier project with Nathan, you know, we were kind of talking about, you know, this project that he was thinking of, and you know, I was thinking about Bruce Sterling's call for 22nd century science fiction, and you know, I'm just fascinated by all these things that Nathan had found, and you know, we'd already been working in AR, and you know, my project, you know, my contribution to it, you know, the archive was, you know, I would kind of set up a lot of the, you know, the parallel universe structure on this thing. And the thing is that while I've been in Arabia for 5 years and haven't been as involved with the project, and Nathan's done such an amazing job with building this thing and brought in so many amazing people, I'm glad to be back in America and seeing where this is gone, and hopefully being a bit more active. And I'm really humbled to see where this has gone.
Fantastic. It's so great to have you with us, Patrick. So this is a room that is open to, you know, any listeners that might be out there on Facebook Live and other places. I want to just acknowledge that it's really an honor to have the, you know, listening attention of Hollis Mickey from the Anchorage Museum, and a prominent artist in her own right, Carol Mears, Adele Person, Executive Director of Bunnell Street Art Center, and also Melissa Shaganoff, who's a key partner in the Shared Universe project, although not specifically in this book. And I just want to welcome you, Melissa, and everyone else, and invite anybody who might like to introduce themselves if they have a key kind of question they hope to share or something we might discuss. This is a great time to, you know, unmute and chime in. All right. Well, if nobody wants to chime in, yeah? No? Hey, Melissa, thumbs up to you. So let's talk about this this project. I understand that Dirigibles of Denali is a culmination of several collaborative augmented reality and digital humanities projects approaching 3 of Alaska's planned cities: Seward Success, Denali City, and Arctic City. All 3 cities are virtually constructed at their original locations using mobile augmented reality technology. And accompanying these augmented reality cities are 10 pieces of speculative fiction by Alaskan artists, some of whom are with us today, imagining a world where these cities had actually been built and an alternative history of Alaska, reflecting that reality. So Nathan, tell us basically how you got into this project and why you picked these writers. Let's sort of step back and see kind of, and others, of course, are welcome to chime in.
Yeah, I'll talk about that a little bit. I'm very, very interested. Oh my goodness, I really want to get into some conversations between the people because of some similarities I found. But I got into the project because I had built Seward Success already for a Rasmussen Foundation award, and then for some reason, Patrick and I got invited to speak at the New Media Caucus in Washington, D.C. about the collaborative project we were working on. The only problem is we weren't working on a collaborative project, and it was nearing the time that we needed to go speak. So we just kind of made this project really quick, and it was just going to be an AR project. And then the more time we spent with the cities, because they are on indigenous lands, and there are certain things that that come up a lot when you start looking at the idea of a dome city in the Arctic, and that's one of the big things is colonialism and building an environment that is hospitable to white people's comfort levels in the Arctic. And that's what you've had for decades with the polar city ideas, this north to the future idea. So I had that in my head that it was a big colonial thing. And then as I started talking to other friends, I realized that there was a major shift that had occurred that I hadn't thought about, and that a dome city was like a archaeological thing. It was a way of conserving the nature that's eroding right now. So we see it as a way of fighting climate change, which is not part of the fiction back then. So I started talking to friends about who are the science fiction writers in Alaska, and I knew Richard, and I knew he introduced me to Lucas really quick. So Richard was the one that kind of punched the nerd card for me. Like, he would be the one I would say science fiction he would know. So I remember talking to him, and I think it was seconds later, he's like, I'm going to tell Lucas about this. And then it kind of started going. And then I realized the science fiction is something that everybody's writing, whether they're like 100% into it or not. We're dealing with those issues all the time. And I think with a lot of Alaskans, they don't want the genre stigma of science fiction. But they're more than willing to write it and talk about it. It's actually really interesting to them. So having people like Vivian, who wrote one of the most amazing stories, or even Skywalker or Leslie, just everybody contributed so deeply. But when we were doing it, I just said, hey, we want speculative fiction set in the dome cities. These are the dome cities, bare minimum thoughts. And I didn't give assignments. Like, I didn't say, Lucas, I want you to write Denali City. Jacqueline, your Arctic. Like, I didn't divvy it up. Everybody just picked their own thing. And then when everybody picked their own thing, they started, it had its own presence about it. And then the similarities became, most people generated towards Denali City because it was made, whether they consciously picked it or not, it was made by an Alaskan who had an intimate knowledge of what Alaska looks and feels like. So the city didn't ooze of other things. It actually seems like, why didn't we build this city? This would have been rad. The other ones, just to see the way they all sort of interspersed. Vivian's story has this zoo-like quality. And Leslie wrote about a zoo in the middle, like Denali City's on fire, and they're trying to save all the elephants. Richard and Lucas have, and Jacqueline too. Jacqueline's less like a future, like almost a dystopian future, but I don't like that word all the way. It was amazing to watch it all come together.
Fantastic. Thank you for that bit of orientation. And we can shift right into the dialogues or questions that you might want to see unfold. I've got questions myself, and I really, Bunnell's really privileged to host a space for shared universe. And so I think it's important that this goes in the direction that you and the participants really would like to, explore. So do you want me to keep throwing out some questions, or would you like to pose some questions as a sort of point of dialogue for the artists? Oh, you're muted. Oh, there we go. But unmute, Nathan.
Yep.
There we go. Brilliant.
All right. What I would actually like to do is I would like to get some of our authors talking about it. Since Richard is really the one who started the shared universe in this iteration where we're making comic books and things now, I would like Richard to kind of guide us through, initially him and Lucas, and then I would like everybody who wrote a story to talk really briefly about their story. And I think that we're going to be running out of time soon, even doing that.
Sure.
But I would like everybody the chance to talk about their story and relationship.
Brilliant. So we'll start with Richard guiding us. Brilliant. Thank you, Richard.
Super. So first off, I don't want to take credit for starting it. I just asked questions. Would this be cool to do? I think that's part of the shared universe thing. That's just continued a conversation. This is really cool. Let's talk about this and write that. So the Wildmen of Denali, or Denali and the Wildmen in this title. The short story, as Nathan had shared, was centered on Denali City. And the great thing about science fiction is that it's really an opportunity to talk about issues, contemporary issues, with a veil. And that veil, gives you a lot of liberty and freedom to discuss things that are important or worthwhile to mention in a greater narrative, so that it it can reach people on multiple levels, not just with the science fiction, but also addressing things that are complex and difficult to see in your own contemporary view, with things with their names and such as they are. In this city, one of the things that I really liked about it was that it was a future, and I wanted to take some older stories from some of my family stories that I've heard, and the Wildmen, from my family stories, I heard there were people who were removed from the village, and they would come back and periodically raid, and they would take women and food and stuff like that from villages, and they were just considered wild men, beast men. And that's where we kind of get the I like to think that's where we kind of get the idea of Sasquatch and the Bigfoot tales is these people who are not quite human, maybe greater than, and they just appear and mysteriously disappear. It was a lot of fun to kind of populate this with ideas. In my particular story, it's populated mostly by artists, musicians, and that's what I thought would be cool. You don't have to work. Most of the food and needs are taken care of by a structure within the city, kind of a computer operated thing. And so need wasn't such a driving force in this community as entertainment and culture and art and music and all the things that I love and adore that don't always get full billing in the wider communities and in the wider culture. The other thing that I thought was important that I wanted to express in my story was that there's not really a central hero. It's really kind of a family dynamic that resolves the issues that come to them. It's not just one person centered, it's broader. It's this family that come together and they have challenges and they overcome them together. And there's no, prime culture or prime aspect to a hero. It's really kind of a family centered thing. So maybe I could just leave it there, and Nathan or Lucas, if you have any questions that you might suppose.
So the Wildmen of Denali, we should also mention, is going to be the first of these stories that the Shared Universe group is turning into a graphic novel. So we're currently working on that one. It's super, super great story. It's going to be an even funner comic book, I think, because of the Wildmen and the Sasquatch aspect of it. It's just it's fun. So I liked. So one of the things I liked about that was this horror aspect that's coming in with this idea of the Sasquatch or whatever we want to call it. That was also present in Lucas's story. He had a horror element that was built into it. Would you care to explain your story, Mr. Rowley?
Sure. And I just liked Richard's story because of the technology and the dome and the materials, the computer stuff. But yeah, it's funny. He mentioned we met him because I heard his Star Trek chirp. The next question was, do you play Dungeons and Dragons? And then we started this huge bromance after that. But so my story was outside the dome, and it was really fun to put it in this universe And I had a character named Smitty, and I just like that name. I wish my name was Smitty. It's like an old sourdough name. There was a tattoo guy named Smitty. My dad hauled me off to an auction for some estate or guy named Smitty. There's guys in Homer named Smitty. So I I use this character named Smitty. But I hope we do a part 2 of this project, because I think I would have, just in the last few years, technology has changed so much. I would have wrote it differently. I'm flying drones now. I've been reading a lot of steampunk, and for some reason, this whole dome city just really just reeks of steampunk technology. So I really hope we do a second part of this. But just in a nutshell, my story was a cautionary tale about farmed salmon. Sort of, there was a native corporation, and they were messing around with genetics, and they made these wolf men that escaped, and they were wreaking havoc on the caribou population. And so this guy comes in and to take care of the wolf problem, and is this big battle up on the Denali Highway that's been overgrown. So it was just a lot of fun. But like I said, there's got to be a part 2, because with the way technology is growing, all of our stories are just going to morph into something else. So
There's room for more comic books, Lucas.
all
I was
right,
thinking the
let's do
same
it.
thing.
Let's do it.
I mean, so that also brings up another point that I hadn't predicted, but felt really good to see. There was a little bit when Patrick and I would put ideas together, was just how much it made more and more ideas. But so many people that wrote short stories here would continue on. Like I know Jacqueline and Skywalker both wanted to write a full-length novel based on this stuff. Like it was very generative. And when we would talk with each other in the Facebook group or whatever, it became even more generative. And I would like to talk about Josh Metzger here, because that's one of the things him and I, our artistic practice is more about generative interaction with people. So that's something that we would purposefully work on. And we, inside of all the stories, we had created also this fake Alaska reality TV show called Dirigibles of Denali that would follow people who were on dirigible crews to all the dome cities. And so there was part of the fiction inside of the story was, I don't know, just basically telling about the television episodes of this story, but it was all collaboratively written with people. So that collaborative fiction became, and it got super goofy and weird. And the goofiest one we had to start the story off with, but I'm gonna out Josh. He wrote that one. It was hilarious. And then it ended up becoming like a whole separate book. One of the characters write a book of poetry at some point. But Josh, I want you to talk about your very short little story and how all the strange things you did. And then I would like to talk to Vivian, actually. I'm gonna have to keep this in my head.
Wait, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, I actually have all that stuff here, Nathan. So my my story was called Saturday Night at the Denali Dome. And my idea was kind of, I don't know, I've never actually seen this movie, but I've heard it referenced so many times. I'll just say, what's Death Race 3000, is that right? It's kind of like a futuristic hack and slash sports theme going on. So the characters with Sourdock and Batman, those were the two kids that were involved with this thing, right? So it's like a skate park, right? So these two teenagers are on I don't even know what you'd call it. They're like electro bikes, right? But they have these, what did I call them? Electro lances, right? And they basically just knock the crap out of each other. That's the idea. But the idea for Denali City, my understanding was that it's entertainment and culture and stuff like that. But I've always liked God help me. In the second Star Wars movie, the Attack of the Clones, I personally thought that the coolest scenes were the future cities, right, where they're like way up in the sky with the flying cars and stuff. So that's, you know, kind of a like a really, like in my mind, like a dark futuristic view of a city. But I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but in my mind, it was more like this is where people come to, you know, get their yayas out and see people, you know, charging at each other with electro bikes. And I thought it was pretty fun. And like Nathan said, we did all sorts of things with this. We had a separate poet. Well, here, Nathan, you can explain it better, but basically I have like a little small press out here in New Jersey, and we published some of those we had an anonymous chapbook series going on out here. It was insane, but you can explain it, Nathan.
Yeah. So part of Josh's practice out there with 24 Hours was this anonymous chapbook project that had I just got a text and I can't read it and talk at the same time, apparently. What was I talking about? Oh, your chapbook project. Yeah. So the chapbooks
anonymously and pseudonymously.
There was a character in the reality show who had a dirigible blimp whose name was Peach.
Right.
He was like this honestly, like kind of this amalgamation of white guilt and I don't know, like the well-meaning liberal that is all about trying to right the wrongs of the world, and it's like this reverse white savior complex. I'm very attracted to that character. Like I'm probably like it's probably like a parody of my own personal things that I'm embarrassed to admit that I think about, and it kind of strikes home really deep for me. I love that character. But the way this character would express himself was in writing poetry, and that became part of the show inside the fiction and all the video games and stuff. And yeah, we put together a poetry book written by this man, and that got like way off topic. The entertainment value though is the thing that was super important. So when Vivian told me the idea for her story, which was based on a lot of reality of people being put in cages. The Sami, for instance, were put in cages and people would come and watch them. The famous one, Ishi and Otabenga, were people that were put in cages and kept in museums. And that idea of turning people into an attraction at the zoo was part of Vivian's story, which was set in Seward Success. Would you like to talk about that for a second, Vivian?
I will. Yeah, I was interested because I'd been researching human zoos, and I learned that the Sami were part of that movement in Scandinavia. So they were put in zoos, hired for being in zoos. So I kind of wanted to incorporate that in there. So I have kind of climate change, kind of cult-like behavior is going on with the colonial world there. And I also set it in way into the future, a couple hundred years from my future, my world into, and so I kind of changed the name to New Seward because climate disasters had happened, and so the Seward Success was rebuilt. And anyway, so I incorporated traditional knowledge too in there with the story of the origin of the Northern Lights, one of the stories. But I did want to do, I wanted to write about a human zoo. And so when this opportunity came up, I thought, well, how can I fit this into this plan? But it kind of all came together at the same time. So it was a fun story. And I like the other writers too, I'm thinking, wow, maybe I'm going to write more stories. And I do have stories about Sami girl and Sami woman that haven't really come to anything. Maybe there'll be a separate collection. This may be in there, or I may extend these characters. But this character, basically Ada, she's been raised in a human zoo. So, and
Wow.
I thought, well, what would I do the if thing, like Stephen King says, what if? And so that was, what if someone was raised in a human zoo? What would their life be like?
So the poetry of your writing came through really, really big. Like, this was a very lyrical story, for as intense and hard as some of those things are that you were dealing with. But I thought it was interesting. So out of all the other people, we might not have talked about this as a group. I think you had the idea for your story, but I wouldn't say it was a struggle. It was maybe more of a concern. You didn't know which city you should pick to write the stories in. And it was kind of locating that, which actually kind of makes sense for your story in some bizarre way. But I think it was because the idea of that city is such a it is a colonial enterprise. It's a setting up something for it was all based on oil extraction and how much wealth can you extract from Alaska. That was the idea of this city, was this city of gold. So it was kind of a perfect place for your zoo. And if it wasn't just Sami in your story, it was Alaska Natives not enclosures. Is that the right word for this?
Yeah, I call them habitats, but they had in Yupik and different Athabascan communities, things like that. So there was, I'm not sure if it says exactly how many, but there definitely was. You could go see the humans in natural environment, in the unnatural environment, I guess. There was a lot of irony in the whole piece.
Yes. I love that. I would like to make sure I get everybody. Jacqueline wrote a story set in Arctic City, which the way for this project, we located it on a peninsula southeast of Kotzebue, where it wasn't originally intended for that. It was sort of kind of like a mobile city that would have been easily constructed multiple times, was the idea of it, but it would be all over the Arctic, and they would kind of daisy chain them together to make bigger cities. And Jacqueline's story did play a lot with what Vivian was talking about, this idea of the natural, and then sort of the man-made, but still steeped somehow in the natural. Would you like to talk about your story, Jacqueline?
Yeah, so I feel like I had the lucky experience of getting to go to the UAF archives and dig up some of the original like memos and drawings and stuff. And to me, I'm originally from Florida. I grew up not very far from Disney World. And to me, a lot of the creation reminded me of that, of Epcot and Celebration and Seaside and these kinds of places that were like constructed for tourism. And I think, so for me, it was interesting to kind of explore this idea of creating a place that meets tourists' expectations instead of letting tourists come to the actual place. And being like completely insulated and domed off from the outside world. And so in my story, there's a lot of facsimile and trying to create that natural world inside. And it kind of snowballed into also being a surveillance state, and I set it after the heyday of the tourism, and so it's kind of this you can really see the way that the facade is crumbling. And I felt like I really loved what Richard said earlier about basically unveiling things in our real lives, like these kinds of projects, these writing projects of speculative and sci-fi fiction, kind of gives us the opportunity, like for me, it gave me the opportunity to take these things that are in the real world and insidious and kind of hidden and underlying, and like really bring them to the forefront and explore them that way.
Awesome. The other Arctic City project, Patrick wrote a story set in Arctic City that's connected to another one. Now, Jacqueline's story, correct me if I'm wrong, Jacqueline, you are turning into a longer book project.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. 'Cause I need to write these down and keep track of them, because there's so many. And hearing Lucas talk about doing a part 2 and hearing Vivian talk about doing a next part to it actually gets me very, very excited about the thought of doing these again as we recreate them. Like the AR stuff, when we made it back in 2017, 2018, doesn't exist anymore. Like that whole platform is gone. So I'm actually currently remaking them, and we're going to be premiering them, I think, in April as an app that's going to connect to the Shared Universe app to do augments on the comic books and things. But I think it's high time some of us get together and figure out if there's a part 2. There's actually, we had some weird publishing issues, but there's a publisher who's interested in this as a tourist book now. So I'm kind of trying to figure out what that would look like if this book was actually at all of those little tchotchke Alaskana shops. I have no problem with it there. I think it's actually fine there, but the thought of it is kind of funny to me to see that, mostly because of how authentically interesting these stories are and how they weren't kind of forced out of anybody. It was just kind of a very general statement. We're doing this. You know, we asked a lot of people that didn't write stories, but these are the people that did. And these stories are all magical and amazing. And them being together reading this book from cover to cover is a very weird, fun, crazy experience. It doesn't make sense how fun it is. And it's amazing to watch the next step, which the step after this was that we started making comic books because we had so much extra content that we didn't use in the stories. So Richard and I both are doing that, and I'm excited to do more. Patrick, who also, you know, we designed the project as an AR project, and we were doing that. He started writing a whole other set of stories that were in Abu Dhabi, where he was at the time, in all other places, and then we connect in to Alaska. So it became this more global story. It wasn't as Alaska centric, but it was still very Alaskan. And I want to ask Patrick to do that, but I want to make sure we also have time for Melissa to talk about it. And one of the big things that came out in this project that we matriculated over to Shared Universe is when you look at the people we have that wrote stories, you know, it's a broad section of Alaska. Some people were born and raised here. Some people moved here. Some people had, I think Skywalker was less than a month or two into being Alaskan. Patrick has stayed here but hasn't lived here. So there's things about all the different Alaskan cultures that we started discussing with each other. If you're going to talk, there's a responsibility you have. If you're going to write a story that involves, say, an indigenous culture or an indigenous language, how do you do that in a way that's sincere and that has good intentions and that is good for the people of Alaska? How do we promote the people of Alaska inside of this? How do we hold each other up? How do we hold each other accountable for what we're saying, what we're doing, what we're using? And so a lot of the conversations that came out of that I feel very happy about that people were able to say that. And then watching the comic books come together now and watching those social practices happen where we're looking at each other like, did you talk to this person? Did you check with this person? This person knows this language or this cultural thing, and looking at each other. So we did our best at the time to also provide this kind of information for Patrick as he wrote his story. Would you like to chat a little bit about that, Patrick?
Let's see here. Yeah, actually, yeah, I already mentioned about how my interest in Alaska and all things Alaska, and base came out of my family's culture. But I think the one thing that really kind of frames a lot of what I did, it had to do with the conversation with when I first came up, because I was from Chicago at the time. And the thing is that when we were going in there, the term Chichaco, basically had, was about, the notion of, oh, here's some guy up from Chicago, who's, basically going on and either acting like a carpetbagger or just, talking about this, that, or the other thing. And the thing is that I think to me, that was something that really influenced me a great deal, because of the fact that when I wrote the archive, which to me is actually a commentary on global colonialism. In other words, the notion of this idea that I'm not very explicit about it, but the notion is that I'm answering Bruce Sterling's idea of 22nd century fiction, and of course going into climate fiction, and we're basically crossing between the projects Nathan found and kind of like 70s dome tropes like Silent Running and Logan's Run, as these ideas in which you could seal off a culture. And I almost kind of saw these global archives in which humanity's knowledge was going to be tucked away, and then the thing is that what the larger population didn't know was that as humanity was going to see whether CO2 was going to run away or not, the archives were about to close. And then as kind of like kind of a neo-colonial sort of thing. The one thing is that also another thing that I kind of got into were, was basically kind of looking at my position, and then also my study of things like Unungan legends and that sort of thing, conversations with people like David Karabelnikov, and my time in ADAC. Basically the thing is that I knew my position. And then the other thing is that the way I wrote the archive was, in this idea of this infinite universe in which different universes were talking to each other and envisioning each other. So in that way, in my kind of weird position, I saw this as maybe a way in which I could at least structure what I was trying to do as a format for infinite inclusiveness of an infinite number of envisionings of these sorts of things. And the places where I had been, like Central Asia and Arabia and the Far East, and even touching into Africa, and possibly bringing these things into a sort of global post-colonial dialogue through this notion of 22nd century science fiction. The thing is that for me, because of the fact that I wasn't raised in Alaska, and I just have family who were part of Alaska, is the fact that one of the things that I looked at is this idea of abstraction that comes from the 22nd century, and the fact that like in my story, California broke off from the United States, it went bankrupt and was brought up by Korea, and it's now called East Korea. So the thing is I'm making certain allusions to the future in that there are abstractions and pluralities and cross-pollinations in which in my universe, I'm trying to speak for my characters as best as I know, without trying to speak for anyone else, because of the fact that I'm taking this conceit of the idea that the world in the 22nd century, may have had different influences that, that create something that, we just don't know yet. While this has been a process for me to listen and learn and, articulate, I think what I would say at the same time a dystopian and a hopeful future. On one hand, I'm talking about a dystopia, but on the other hand, is that underneath it is a hopefulness in that there is a resilience and a plurality of humanity that comes forth from our own consciousness, I guess. And currently I have actually on the books about 5 or 6 more stories that are pretty far reaching, and I hope that I write them. But the one thing is that after Nathan and I had spent time and worked on these, worked on the initial scaffold on this, is the fact that I think what happens for me is that tackling issues like the potential the potential of the sixth extinction, how this could wind up in a neocolonial situation, how to construct a story like this that isn't drawing walls, has a very open format, and the thing is still has a general respect for the people who I have a general interest in, because the thing is that they touched my family's life. And and then the other thing is that also such a deep respect for Nathan's work in AR in Alaska. I guess the thing is that building this idea of of the archaeological nation, idea of these domes, the idea how that they could comment on post-colonial society, and basically the thing is gently gently play with my my learning of Alaskan cultures, like what was it the Weekle,
the beluga hunting platform.
Yeah, which was one, which I thought was so bizarre that they have that diorama in the in the Anchorage airport, and to me, I thought that was just such a interesting, bizarre thing.
That's actually a good segue here. So, Melissa, correct me if I'm wrong, that was Joel Isaac made that diorama for the Denina show, which is like this incredible piece of Denina culture. Sorry about the bell. I had to take a break at school. Melissa's this incredible artist. Like, she's just this wonderful human on top of that. She's a quintessential part of the Shared Universe group. But I always love listening to her talk. And one of the things that I would like to ask her to talk about, and Asia would as well, I'm gonna speak for Asia here too, because it was Asia's prompt a while back. There's a responsibility a lot of us have when we fantasize and imagine on top of Alaska. We're placing our fantasies on a land that's that's indigenous land, and there's a responsibility. But there's more than that. There's all sorts of things. Could you speak about what those things mean? What do we do going forward?
Yeah, and I think I just wanted to make a note of something that you said earlier, Nathan, was that having that everyone kind of in this group was sort of made aware of their responsibilities, right? As far as to the thousands and thousands of years of history in Alaska, right? I mean, I talk about it a lot that according to archaeological record, and that's the Western sort of record, Native people have been here for 15,000 years, and that's before the pyramids, that's before written language, that's so old, that's such an ancient catalog of histories and stories that are available, just of course not in the transmission of written language, which is still yet to be determined on whether what is superior. So I think that in some ways, you know, imagining a future in science fiction, you know, on top of kind of like already this sort of like rich history, it's interesting to kind of see what sort of stories came out, you know, particularly in the books, right? You know, I've only read the books as a reader, as an audience member, you know, but hearing all of you, you know, in this book club that we're essentially creating, you know, it's interesting because I think that in our writing and in our creation, we always give an extension of ourselves, you know, an extension of our ideas and our thoughts. You know, I heard that so much with like Vivian and with Richard, you know, and this idea of, you know, we ended with Patrick, right, talking about neocolonialism, you know, which in many ways is essentially like various forms of imperialism and extraction, right? And you know, this, I think it's interesting. I'd love to talk to him more about kind of this purity that he sees, because, you know, that's not exactly what I see. And so I wonder too, like in imagining these futures, you know, in what ways are we making note that there's so much havoc and there's so much, you know, upheaval that happens, you know, in this idea of imagining a future outside of indigenous ways of being, which is truly the most sustainable way of being in Alaska, you know, and how is it that we address those ideas, you know. I definitely want to dive more into like what Lucas was talking about of, you know, like the corporations like creating this sort of like subhuman wolf man, you know, and you know, definitely Vivian, it's interesting, it's just a repetition of different colonial practices that have already happened upon indigenous people and atrocities, you know, in the human zoo. And, you know, so yeah, I think we need to have another like Dirigibles book club. You know,
It feels like this is right where the conversation needed to be for us to have the actual deep conversation on the.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're right at the top of the hour where I know people need to go. But what I want to ask you to do, if you can, whether it's in the chat or in an email to Nathan, to whom I know you're all connected, is just to take a moment after we sign off and write down the questions and the ideas that are kind of looming in your mind right now. It could be anybody who's listening in, certainly, but please, the artists who are directly part of this project, that is a very exciting place to position ourselves for the next conversation.
Yeah, would it be worth continuing this the next time we do a book club meeting? Because I feel.
Well, I'm as enthusiastic as anyone might be in the room, so.
I think it would be great. It would be nice to bring Leslie and Skywalker and other people who weren't able to participate also into the conversation.
Yes.
I think, yeah.
Let's do that, but let's frame that conversation. And if you need to go ahead and do it. But will you make a note to yourself, each of you who are present, to or pause in this chat box to frame some questions that, you know, you sort of find yourself at this point in the dialogue, so we can pick it up right at this really rich place where we've arrived at today. And again, I want to thank you all so much for the work that you're doing and the time that you've taken to participate in this dialogue. Really looking forward to continuing it, and be well until next time.
Yes, Aja, can I say, I'm going to make sure everybody can get a digital copy of this. You guys, we'll put up some links so that way if people wanted to keep following the conversation, they're able to read them.
That's right. So this conversation, you'll be able to see it in a few minutes on Facebook Live, but you'll also be able to find it. Anybody can find it at benellarts.org under Inspiration and Adaptation. There's an archive now of nearly 50 conversations, and this will be the most recent one. You can listen to it again and just sort of review the questions that occur to you, and we'll move forward in our next book club, Shared Universe, pick up some of these conversations. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care and be well.
Thank you so much.